Today I want to talk about miracles. I'm starting the series on the evidences of Christianity, but when you think about the topic of miracles, some of the things that come to mind are the miracles that happened during the Exodus, the miracles Jesus performed, things of that nature. But what about now? What about today? Is uh, something like miracles a possibility today? And I would submit to you that they are things that happen today, uh, not just back in biblical times, but things that happen today. And I'll share a few of those that have happened in my life. Uh, I'll be talking about two today, but the third one I'll talk about in another series that I'm getting that I'm setting up. So I'm only going to talk about two of those three today. Um, Physical miracles in my life. And I'll start with one that was a very simple, very quick type of miracle that happened to me many years ago, at a time when I still had hair, at a time when I was much younger and a lot more foolish even than I am now. Um, my parents, they lived about an hour and a half from where I live, and they always had the New Year's Eve party for our family, and there was no drinking allowed like that. They were very strict about no alcohol in the house or to be used for during parties. And so I hadn't been drinking or anything like that, but I left there after midnight, and I'm on my way home. And we had been experiencing a little bit of freezing rain at that time, and I was just cruising down the road at my normal speed down the highway, and not really thinking about the conditions so much. My take on ice, driving on ice, was, well, you can still go the same speed. You just can't stop, and while that's true, it's not usually the best policy to follow. And as I'm going along, I start sliding sideways, and I'm headed toward either going down this embankment and possibly rolling over, or hitting the guardrail because I was coming up to an overpass, and there was a guardrail that was leading up to that. And those seem to be the only two physical options available at that particular time. It was coming up quick. Let's put it that way. One way or the other was those seemed to be the two options. I'm hanging onto the wheel, and I'm not really steering. I'm not braking. I'm not really doing anything. And all I had time to do was say, "Lord, save me." And in that moment, I was back on the road. I mean, as soon as the words came out of my mouth, all of a sudden I was going underneath the overpass and didn't hit anything, didn't go off the road or anything. And it's not, I've driven on icy roads a lot since then. Whenever your wheels catch from a slide like that, there's usually a pretty violent shaking, and I didn't feel any of that. And as I'm going under the overpass, I'm thinking, what just happened? But at that time, I wasn't really connecting the dots, and that's really one of the funny things about miracles in general is even when you experience them, and this is biblical as well. I mean, a lot of the people that were there and witnessed Jesus's miracles, for instance, or in the Exodus, even though they were seeing some of the greatest things that had ever happened, they didn't combine it with faith. They didn't understand what was actually happening, even though they were witnesses to it. And I would say that was my experience right away too. I mean, I slowed down after that and got myself home, um, but it took a while for me to process that and understand what had just happened, and attaching those two events, the calling for to save me, and then the immediate response. It's not something most people expect, even when they are people of faith. We call out for those things. I think sometimes we're not really expecting it, and then it happens, and then we don't know what to do. But that was one of the things that happened to me. And that was spur of the moment. No, uh, no time for me to sit and actually pray. I just called out, and was responded to. I thank God for that moment. The other is a little bit more complicated. It was something that took place some years after that. That it almost seemed contrived, like it was an event that was being staged, arranged for me to be in a certain place at a certain time to do a certain thing, and it revolves around. Well, it started with me. My wife, excuse me, my wife and I went. We worked together, and we worked at this manufacturing facility. We were working midnights. We were the only two people that would be working at that time because we were trying to get ahead on this one part so that they could change over and have a long run on this other part. And as we get to work that night, the second shift supervisor came and said, "Well, we're not going to do that tonight. We're going to do this other thing." And not that I was ever, I wasn't afraid of a good argument, but usually when my boss told me to do something, I would just go ahead and do it. I may question the logic of what they were doing, but I would just go ahead and do it. In this particular case, though, I got, no, we're not going to do that. We were on this shift to do this specific thing, and that's what we're going to do. That's what we were told to do. That's what we're going to do. And the second shift supervisor very upset with me, and we were arguing back and forth. And he goes in and calls the plant manager, and the plant manager was going, "Well, you need to do this." And even with him, I was going, "No, we're not doing that. You told me this was what I was on this shift to do, and that's what we're going to do. I don't want to stay on here any longer than I have to." And finally, he gets upset enough to he says, "Okay, obviously you're not changing your mind. You go home, think about it, come back in the morning. We'll have a meeting. We'll decide how we're going to proceed here." And after we left, we're thinking, "Well, we're probably going to get fired or some sort of discipline of some kind." And as I walk in the door, I hadn't even got my shoes off, hadn't even sat down on the couch yet. The phone rings, and I'm thinking it's probably my supervisor or the plant manager saying, "Hey, come back in," or "You're fired," or something to that effect. Wasn't sure exactly what it was because we had just left there. We only lived a few minutes away. But it wasn't. It wasn't anybody from work. It was my cousin who was calling me. And she was telling me that my dad had a heart attack. And he wasn't breathing, and when the paramedics were taking him out, that they were, doing CPR on him and trying to revive him, but he wasn't breathing when they left. And so, as you can tell from the earlier story, I live about an hour and a half away from my parents, my hometown, and we drive down there, fully expecting my father to be dead. Not thinking anything really any different there, but just wanting to be there and to comfort my mother, and we would deal with the other situation at work in the morning. But when we got there, they said, well, they were able to revive him, and he was in a coma in the intensive care unit, and but his heart was really stretched out of shape. They didn't think it would continue to beat on its own. His body was really bloated when we saw him. I mean, he was a little bit of a heavy set guy anyway, but he looked like a balloon with too much air in it. He was just really really swollen through his whole upper torso. And so we go in there, and I see him, and his eyes are closed, and again they said he was in a coma. And I put my hand on his, and I begin to pray. And I asked God that I didn't think that he had had enough time with his grandson yet. My son was very young at the time, and they hadn't had a lot of time to be together for them to get to know his grandparents, and for his grandparents to get to know him a little bit better. And that if God would heal him, that I would give the time that I had, because he was a child from my first marriage, I would give the time that I had during the summer months to my parents so that they could spend some time with him and get to know him a little bit better, and he to know them. And it was a very short prayer, very heartfelt. I was in tears and everything at the time. And when I opened my eyes, I looked down at his face, and his eyes opened. And when his eyes opened, he started, mouthing something. I don't know what it was. I never got to hear it. The oxygen mask was over it, and so I don't know what he was trying to say at that particular moment. But the nurse was passing by on the other side of the bed and said, when she looked down and saw his eyes were open, she got us out, all of us out of the room, and went to get the doctor. And we were out in the waiting room for a while, and some time passes, and the doctor comes out and says, "Well, the good news is he's out of the coma right now, but um, we don't think that his heart can continue to beat on its own very much longer. So he's not out of the woods. He's out of the coma right now, and we're just going to observe him for a while and keep a watch. We don't really still expect him to make it through the night, but why don't you guys go home, get some rest? We'll call if anything changes. The moment it changes, we'll give you a call if anything happens." So take my mother home and let my cousin know, hey, we have this meeting in the morning. We're going to run back home there. Call if anything changes. We'll zip right back down. And we go up, and the next morning, 8 o'clock, we have our meeting with our boss, and basically they just told us, hey, don't do that anymore. No discipline of any kind. We just missed that one night of work. But had we not missed that night, had that not happened, I wouldn't have been home to receive that call. This was before cell phones were a thing. So we had to be right there for that phone to ring when it did. Um, Later that morning, my cousin calls us and says, "Hey, we got some great news. And not only is he out of the coma, but he's talking. His body shape has returned. They think his heart is starting to operate more the way it should. That its shape seemed to be returning really quickly. That the nurses were telling my cousin they called my dad the Miracle Man because he was dead when they brought him in, and through the skill of some great EMTs and some great doctors and nurses, they got him alive long enough for me to come down there, and I think the reason I was there was to pray that prayer over him, and something that God would use in my life in a powerful way for me to bolster my faith, but also something that I can share with you, and understand that God cares very deeply about each one of us. I think there are probably little miracles and big miracles that happen all the time that people miss because of their lack of faith. I would say keep your eyes open, and if you know that when you can reach out to Him in faith, He hears it, and I know that He's willing to respond. So that's all I have for today. Again, I have a third miracle I want to talk about in another series because it's it's a much lengthier process that I need to go through. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. And thanks for listening. Have a great day.